They understand the psychology of you and how to exploit you. The manosphere gets that. Technology understands that. The bros understand that. People who are high up understand it, and they use it and they weaponize it against us.
Welcome to the Masking Tapes. I am your host, Carolina Hidalgo-McCabe, and I am so excited here to be joined by Dr. Saed D. Hill. Dr. Saed D. Hill is a counseling psychologist and an independent consultant who specializes in the promotion of pro-social masculinities and wellness. And I am just so excited to have you on this pod. We're going to dive into conversations around AI, masculinity, the manosphere, violence prevention, etc. And so I just want to hand the floor over to you, Dr. Hill, just to give a little bit of an intro of who you are and how you got into this work.
Absolutely. So thanks a lot. Happy to be here with you, Carolina. Yeah, how didn't I get into this work? Honestly, looking back at things, I mean, I feel like early on, the truth is, early on in my career as a budding psychologist in grad school, they used to give you a big booklet of all the different things you could go to, all the lectures you could go to, workshops, and that sort of thing. Thick booklet. And being me at the time, I kind of mapped out what I wanted to go to, but I decided one day to just like one of the days to just randomly flip through it and point at something, and I would just go to it. And it ended up being a lecture about feminism and psychology. So I decided to go. I was the only man there when I went in a room filled with women. And a lot of the stories that women were talking about was the harassment that they've experienced by men in the field, men outside of the field. And it kind of made me, as somebody, brand new to getting my PhD, it was my first year in graduate school, made me really wonder like what's going on with us as men, in these stories and wondering more about that. And it just led me to wanting to research more about it, what's going on with the psychology of men. I was studying couples and family therapy at the time. I saw the way some of the men showed up in my relationship, and this is not to say it was all on men, but being a man myself, I know what it's like to be in relationships, and I knew sometimes, like, why would I shut down in that conversation? Or why would I feel angry about this comment that really wasn't supposed to be personal, but I'm taking this so personally right now? What's kind of going on with controlling my emotions? And it made me think about my dad and how he's a loving man, but didn't have a whole lot of range of emotion for me. He was either angry or really happy, and there wasn't a whole lot of in between. I was never taught about my emotions as a man, I think, growing up. And I just struggled a lot with who I was as a man, and there wasn't a whole lot of information about what to be or how to be. And so in school, I just decided I want to fully immerse myself in understanding more about men and masculinity.
Wow. And I think what you're hitting on there is what actually got me to start asking this first question that I ask on every episode of my podcast of what is one of the hardest things about being a man, because I was
Right.
realizing that a lot of the young men around me were saying like, I don't know how to even name my emotions because I've not been given the permission to experience this range of emotions.
Mhm.
So I'll throw that back at you, which is, Dr. Hill, what is one of the hardest things about being a man?
Yeah, and I've been thinking about this question, and I don't think that I've actually ever been asked this question before, so I'm really appreciative of it. I think there's a short answer, is what's really tough about being a man is hearing that people will prefer the bear over me is really tough. I mean, that's really tough to a pill to swallow and sit with. But it makes me really much more inquisitive as opposed to taking it personally, right? So I think that's one is just feeling really hurt that people might feel that way and might find me inherently maybe dangerous for some reasons or off-putting or things that are beyond my control in the moment is really hard to kind of sit with. I think sort of mapping it out a little bit more broadly, I think it's just this narrow script that I've been kind of given my whole life, about and we call it in the field the man box, right? This idea that there's these rigid norms that you have to adhere to be considered a man or masculine, and if you don't adhere to those things, you're less than, right?
Okay.
But it's just being a man, I think, is so riddled with contradictions, and I think that's the most difficult thing for me is what is the right answer. So
Mhm.
there's this idea of being strong, right? Being independent. You don't need anybody. You don't need to ask for help. But you're all supposed to be a protector and a provider, but also like don't feel too much with those emotions, right? But at the same time, if you take all that to its logical conclusion, it means you might be kind of suffering in silence a little bit, and I could feel that way. But then asking for help is frowned upon, right? Opening up more might be frowned upon. You might be, I've been told this before, like that's a little too much, Saeed. Like, we want you to
Yeah.
open up, but maybe that's a little too vulnerable or a little too much. So this idea of, well, you're not supposed to open up because you're not as much of a man. But then when you do, someone's telling you, like, that's a little much too for me, right? So I think that there's these contradictions that I sort of sit with, and I needed to kind of find my own internal compass for what it means to be a man. And I've sort of pieced that together from a lot of different places.
And I think what's so incredible about that is that you were able to piece that what it means to be a man together in the contradictions and also the things that align. And I think what I'm witnessing with a lot of young men today, whether they're my peers or the generation below me, is that there's this questioning of like, what does it even mean to be a man? And we have all these voices that are filling that void,
Right.
especially in the far right areas of the manosphere that are instead using that kind of language to profit off of young men's questioning of what it
Right.
means to be a man. And right before this, we were just talking about Inside the Manosphere, which is this new documentary on Netflix. And you mentioned that you'd watched it. What were your thoughts watching this documentary?
Yeah, so two things. I think on one hand, again, riddled with contradictions, I guess. On one hand, I'm really excited that this is mainstream and that people are talking about this, right? I've been doing this work for a long time. I think the first time I was like looking at incel content to try to get an understanding of what's going on with men was over 10 years ago at this point, right? Just kind of like on the Reddit message boards and trying to understand what's going on and then forecasting like this might be impacting politics. What's going on, right? And all of these thoughts, right? So on one hand, it's like, wow, look at where this has come, and now everyone's talking about it. So now it's like, oh, it's my time to shine, I guess. Like now
Yeah.
I'm supposed to be out here talking about this, and that's really exciting. On the other hand, I am horrified at how mainstream like incel content has become and how mainstream the terminology has become. Incel culture and some of this far right culture in the manosphere has become pop culture, because I think that there's something rather entertaining for a lot of people about it, and interesting. It baits a lot of clicks for people and a lot of content. I also think with this documentary, I'm really struck by, I think it's a great intro into the world of the manosphere. And what I was particularly struck by was Louis' ability to try to almost humanize some of these folks in the manosphere, like some of the guys that they have, followed around in the documentary. And I think that that's a big part too, is especially as a psychologist, really kind of examining a lot of these folks grow up to be these men who are rather performative and doing things that can be very harmful to other men and exploiting other men's loneliness and isolation and insecurity about who they are and where they come from. But these are men that have experienced a lot of trauma, generally speaking, in their lives, and now they're exploiting other men's traumas in their lives. And I don't think that they always can sit with that contradiction or notice it. And the times that Louis sort of really pointed it out to people, because these men come from a lot of them come from horrible backgrounds or don't have a lot of male figures in their lives and all of these things. And I think that kind of shows you without that guidance, how folks go to this like easy way of trying to be, which means sort of doubling and tripling down on sort of the rigid, man box stuff that we're talking about before, thinking that that's going to protect you and make you more powerful, and it just doesn't. So it comes at a long-term expense.
Absolutely. And I think it boils, I really appreciate it in this documentary. He's following several different large influencers on the manosphere. And while he's like going into their fancy houses or whatever and finding out about their interesting relationship dynamics that are oftentimes very dehumanizing or degrading towards the women in their lives or the kids in their lives, he's also like showing their baby pictures, and it's like a reminder of like, oh, these were kids one day. And they didn't have the kind of role models or the father figures in their lives that helped them flourish as young men, and instead turned much far right and are pretty empty in many ways in their lives. I think one of the hardest things for me was seeing so many young men going up to these influencers on the streets and being like, "You're my role model, man. Like you don't know how much you mean to me." And so I think in one vein we have young men who are turning towards influencers, such as these guys who are really profiting off of deals with gambling websites, etc., and with their universities of how to make money while you're sleeping, basically. And there used to be this idea of like men were going to work really hard to make their money. And now it's like, actually, how do you make it as frictionless as possible to make money? And then we have this whole other side, which you specialize in, is young men who are turning towards artificial intelligence as a form of companionship or as a crutch in relationships or as a tool for abuse. So I'd love to transition a little bit in how you see AI shaping or interacting with young men's relationships today.
The word you just used, which I really appreciate, is frictionless. And I think that that's a key component of this. I think AI has been rather appealing for men and boys who maybe really struggle with navigating real relationships and the friction in particular in real relationships. Things like, what do I do when my partner or partners disagree with me, right? What happens when a relationship feels disappointing or a partner is disappointed in me in particular? What if there's a rupture and someone's just mad at me and upset at me? That can be really dysregulating for a lot of men who are sort of stuck in this dynamic of like, well, opening up and exploring more depth can feel really vulnerable. And maybe if I don't do that, it's a little safer. Um, but it might keep you kind of trapped in this sort of relationship that doesn't feel very fulfilling for people. And I think AI sort of offers this idea that, like, hey, by the way, I'm never going to leave you. AI relationship, says to me as a man, like, I'm always here for you. You don't even have to care about if I like you or not, because I'm always liking you. I'm rather sycophantic. I want to do whatever you want to do. There's no disagreements, there's no friction in that way. A lot of the men and boys I've worked with who have used AI companions for relationships have said this very thing, like, well, you know what? The AI never disagrees with me, it's never mad at me, it'll never abandon me. And especially in the work I do with AI, I'm much less interested in the existence of AI and critiquing that for this, as opposed to I am, what are the real human reasons people are turning to AI? And I think it feels very, uh, clear to me that we aren't doing a great job of helping these young men connect to what real relationships are sort of feeling like. And it's sort of the easy button of what I suppose is really good for a relationship is to have this frictionless, no drama, no nothing. And I can just like cruise on this. And that feels good to me. But I think that might feel good for a period of time, but I think that comes at a real long-term cost for
Yeah.
men in these relationships. So I can see the appeal from that standpoint, but I don't think everyone is sort of understanding how the friction deepens relationships and have the opportunity to cause more depth and even more closeness, which a lot of men are saying that they lack. And so instead, they're avoiding it when they could be steering into it a little bit more, and that could be really helpful to them.
Yeah. No, and I think the tech industry is really trying to make everything as frictionless as humanly possible. But
Sure.
that also takes away like the depth of relationships and the depth of like where your relationships could grow into. And I remember one time in one of my early relationships after like a heartbreak, my mom was like, Carolina, like you need to, like, I was once told that there are two options in this life. Like you could either be a plastic rose or you could be a real rose. And the plastic rose will last forever. It won't cause like, it won't have any thorns that draw blood or anything like that. Like it'll be perfectly colored, et cetera, et cetera. Or you could be a real rose, which will wilt, will have thorns, will change colors, et
Oh.
cetera, et cetera. And she's like, and still on Valentine's Day, people go buy the real roses instead of a
Mm.
plastic rose. And she was like, because that's where like it's the emotion that comes with that. And I think that like to me, like AI feels like this kind of smooth dependency on like a version of a plastic rose that you're like, look, it is a relationship. Look at this, but it doesn't have. It's always up. It's always ready to respond to you. It's not going to contradict you, et cetera, et cetera. And I think we've become less comfortable with any kind of friction in our lives. And
Mhm.
even with my generation with dating apps and the aversion to risk taking, I think people got so used to the swiping and now all of a sudden just like take away even the swiping and then you're really risk free. All you have to pay is $13.99 a month and you can have a companion. And so
Yeah,
there is
yeah.
this like crazy change here. And I wonder like what is the point where that wears off or how long is that sustainable for? Or then if someone does transition from an AI companion to a in-person relationship, how does that then impact their in-person relationship?
Yeah. Well, let me first say, I think that's a beautiful, sort of is an analogy, I guess, with the
Yeah.
rose. I feel like that is pretty spot on. And as a matter of fact, when I was doing couples and family therapy, one of the number one things couples used to come in and say to me was, well, Saeed, we just don't want to fight anymore. That's why we're
Mm.
here. And I would often say to them, well, this probably isn't for you though, because that's not what the therapy is for. It's how to work
Yeah.
through those things. It's working through that tension, through those disagreements. And I think people miss that is that the most depthful relationships I've ever had in my life are ones where we've had to really work through issues and do repair work. So let me say first, I think that AI can maybe be helpful for certain types of people who might need some training wheels for some of these relationships, right? Relationships are messy and humans are messy. They can kind of help you negotiate a little bit. Well, what am I into? What am I maybe not into to a certain degree? How do I just strike up a conversation with someone? How do I work through an issue? As a matter of fact, we know a lot of people use things like ChatGPT and other AI platforms to work through issues that they might be having with a partner or potential partner and these sorts of
Mm.
things. I think the issue is if it starts to be less about a helpful tool versus a complete replacement of humans altogether. And so if you're used to a relationship that has zero friction, it absolutely, and we already know it, will impact your ability to thrive in any kind of human dynamic because now those human dynamics are going to feel much more foreign to you. I think at the same time, if you always have something that's always available to your wants and needs, that's totally going to increase some of your entitlement of certain things. It could increase your more controlling behaviors. Your rejection sensitivity can increase. And it can make you just withdraw. We've seen these cases of people, more and more people withdrawing from human relationships because the technology can feel rather addicting because it's sort of like an influx of like all the attachment issues somebody might have. Well, let me give you something that's constantly validating those attachment issues that you might be
Yeah.
having. And that's almost feels like a slot machine or something, some sort of gambling thing that can feel addictive to
Uh-huh.
someone. And you might need more and more of that because you're building more and more tolerance to that addiction because you're used to always getting what you want, right? You're always creating a fantasy that's always going to be fulfilled. So I can see that totally spiraling for many people too.
I recently heard like our phones are less like computers in our pockets these days. They're more like casinos in our pockets. And I think
Hmm.
that there is that kind of like dopamine hit of like, oh my God, oh my God. But then you need more of it to feel satisfied. Whereas I think in a human relationship, you're feeling like, oh my God, when are they gonna text me back? Are they gonna text me back? Like, will they like and there's something
Yeah.
that it just feels like and then when they finally do text back, that's so exciting. Like it is so whereas like AI you can always depend like there's no you up. Like AI is always up. Like there's
Right.
no and I think that that's a huge piece. And then I also think I've heard from some friends that like on the dating apps now some folks are using like ChatGPT, like taking the text that someone sent them on a dating app, putting it in there and being like, "What do I respond?" And then they send it back. And then it's also on that other person's also using it. So it's basically like AI talking to each other. And then they get in person and they're like, "Oh, how do we interact?" And
Yes.
I feel like it's like a new version of catfishing, but like there needs to be another term for that.
So, what's interesting is that I've posed this question to some of my students I've worked with at Yale about this very topic, where we asked some students, well, do you think the use of this sort of technology to even flush out your messages a little bit, clean them up, smooth those edges in some of the messages, is that more akin to catfishing or like spell check, for example,
Mm.
right? And I feel like a lot of people will automatically right, say for themselves, well, this is feels like a betrayal, right? And it depends on how it's being used, right? Because there's a
Mhm.
consent dynamic to this too. If well, how would you feel if you fell in love with someone or just were interested in somebody and it come to find out all their messages were AI generated? I mean, that would feel like a complete betrayal. But some
Mhm.
people are using the tech for a lot of different reasons. Some it might be, I know some students who are on the spectrum who have used
Mhm.
this to try to be beneficial to themselves and how to communicate a little bit differently. Some people who just have an extreme aversion to like social dynamics, so a lot of this social insecurity and anxiety that's caused some of that. Some people who just don't have a lot of dating experience. And what's interesting though is I sort of posed the question of like, well, do you would you feel betrayed by this? And almost everyone said yes. But then I sort of asked the question, the follow-up, well, what if someone on their date with you ended up admitting to this, using it for the date, but then told you why, and
Mm.
ended up kind of being much more vulnerable about their insecurities, about rejection and insecurity about perception and all these other things. How would you feel then? And overwhelmingly, a lot of students said, well, I just appreciate that they're being honest and opening up and being vulnerable because I feel like that too. You know, ghosting has been on the rise. More and more people are just leaving relationships and leaving situationships without even really letting people know why or what's going on. Meanwhile, more and more people are saying, I hate that. Like, I hate that people do that to people, yet a lot of people are doing it. That doesn't really compute for me, and it kind of means we need to be doing a better job of sort of talking to each other about why we're sort of using this technology and not. But it comes down to people just want to connect to humans again, and I think this technology is sort of uh, just saying like we're going to take away all the vulnerabilities from relationships that are human. So really, what we're saying is we're going to get rid of loneliness. We're going to get rid of feeling rejected. We're going to get rid of any kind of friction or any issue, and it's like, well, that's the human parts of a relationship. And so what's
Mhm.
the incentive of doing that? Well, I think you also talked on it. I think there's a monetary sort of, uh,
Yeah.
assessment here that's going on that keeps people using this technology for those reasons.
Yeah, and I mean, like, as a young woman, I remember when I was, like, a teenager and I was drafting text to a boy I liked, and I would have, like, all my female friends around me, and they'd be, like,
Hmm.
helping me draft it, it wasn't, like, always my own thoughts, he'd be like, "Oh my god, should I put a period or should I leave it without the
Right.
period?" Like, it was also a bonding experience, like, I
Hmm.
was bonding closer to my other female friends, and I don't know what it's like to be a young man or a boy doing that, and I think it's probably less collaborative, but I think there's something lost, but I also understand where that could be a healthy crutch to help someone get back to socializing in person again, especially in this post-pandemic era where we're trying to figure out how do we interact with each other again. Are there any specific examples that you in your work have seen of people interacting with AI companions or how that's influenced their day-to-day life?
Absolutely. I mean, both personally and professionally, but I'd say even personally, I have some friends, and they won't mind me mentioning this, but no names, no specific names, but who are going through breakups, long-term breakups, divorces, and things like this. And I had one friend in particular say, "Hey, Saeed, you talk about AI all the time and ChatGPT. Well, I asked ChatGPT, I put into ChatGPT exactly what happened in my relationship and why we broke up." And ChatGPT had my backside. It told me like it was all this person's fault. I was in the right. Like I showed up the invisible labor, all of these ways that they were disrespectful to me. And it was just a breath of fresh air to have that sort of validation. So I just wanted to let you know that sometimes ChatGPT hits, right? So they wanted to let me know that, right? Little do they know that I actually know this ex of theirs too. And this ex actually did the exact same thing. Where they said, Saeed, like I went to ChatGPT and I was like, hey, this was what happened in the relationship. And what do you kind of think? And ChatGPT was like, you know what? They didn't see all the invisible labor you were doing. They didn't see all the ways that you showed up in this relationship positively, and that's their loss, right? And it's on them. And it was like, well, look, Saeed, it's right? Look, this is
Yeah.
this is what's truth. And I think that was a really illuminating moment for me And if it's any confirmation that we need about what's kind of going on, is that ChatGPT learns you, and not just ChatGPT, the AI learns
Yeah.
you, the algorithm knows you. It's pulling from like the things that you put into it, and it's pulling from all over the internet, but it's giving you something. It knows what you want, and it's going to
Hmm.
feed you that validation. And I think on one hand that can be really healing for some people. Maybe people need that, to be heard and to be felt and to not be rejected and to explore and be creative and all these other things. Like a lot of people use AI because they're afraid of being rejected, and they're afraid of what they want and what they need in a relationship is going to be deemed too much. And so here's this technology that's going to help me feel good in that, right? And people deserve that, and I think that's wonderful. On the other hand, though, it's that's so addicting. It can be like we said, that could be so addicting and alluring. And your brain, the chemistry in your brain does not make a distinction between this being human or not. It just feels good. It's the feeling of it. And it's going to feel really amazing to you. But what you're losing there is sort of that human element to let the human element of the mess sort of help you smooth out some of the edges or work through things. Like your example of all these, girls and women sitting around and helping you draft the text. I had experiences like that as a man, where we had like some of my boys like, she texted this back. I don't know what to say about this. Like, where do I go with this? Like, and then us sort of talking it through. And even then, it's not 100% maybe my voice, but it is like, I'm going to disagree sometimes with my boys. They're kind of like, no, 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 that's not exactly how I'd say it. I'd say it like this. It's collaborative in that way. Whereas I think a
Hmm.
lot of us think of AI and the technology as being smarter than us. There's a lot of statistics about and surveys about how human beings kind of perceive AI to be smarter than we are, even though that's not true. That's not the case. Like this isn't a human entity. This is pulling from all of us as humans and our information to
Hmm.
give us something more generic that can be appealing to a broad audience. And so, so if we think that's always smarter, we're not going to disagree as much. We're not going to push back
Yeah.
on it as much. Whereas a human might say to me, like, Said, and I've had friends do this, like, say, like, I agree with you about that breakup, but you also did kind of trip out here, and this is what you
Yeah.
did, and like you should think about that. I had brothers in my life that just like checked me a little bit, and then with the
Hmm.
women in my life to kind of say like, no, the way you talked to that woman that time, like that's
Yeah.
not cool. Like, and taking that advice, right? And it's collaborative in that way, and that's a human element of things that you're gonna miss in the AI when you're just alone in a room doing that with them, because we also know the use of AI is still very much stigmatized. So although a lot more people are using it than we know of, people are still kind of doing it alone.
Hmm.
And there isn't that kind of like reality testing that's going on, which I think is a real potential issue too.
Yeah. No. And it's so complex because you can imagine where like in a relationship, if both parts of the couple are going to ChatGPT and putting in their situations and they're hearing the validation of like you're right and you've got this, like that other person, you can see how it could drive a wedge between folks if you're not keeping it in check. Like, yeah.
And as a follow-up to that, I also know couples who, and I've seen some of these reports too, that will in the moment of an argument pull out their phones. Talk about that phone addiction thing. Will pull out their phones and type into AI, this is what the argument is in real time. What's your opinion on it? And then hold the phone up to their partners to say, look, you're wrong about this, right? So that is also an absolute thing that's going on. So as a couples therapist 10 years ago, I mean, I couldn't even
Yeah.
forecast like what in the world is this 10, 15 years ago? What's going on? But people are so wanting to be validated, and I validated, and I think this gives us a real glimpse into some of the couples dynamics. Is that
Mm,
what would it be like to just be in friction with a partner, and instead of having to kind of get your stuff in, right, having to get your perspective off, because I think we're desperate to, and we feel like we won't be heard. What if people kind of negotiate around it as like, hey, I want to hear you out. What if I just listen to you uninterrupted and I respond to you, and like even validated a concern someone had instead of just like lying about it, gaslighting people,
yeah.
or just rejecting it because it's hard for us to hear it. What if we just validated someone? That actually helps people feel more comfortable, more safe, more,
Mm,
it's easier for people to come to us if we're able to do that for them. And actually what it really does do, it helps them create more space for us to also be heard. And I think a
mhm,
lot of us are afraid we're never going to get heard, and so we're going to this technology that's always going to hear it because we're not trusting our human dynamics and our human relationships. And don't get me wrong, I think there's a lot of human elements where that never happens, that validation never happens. And I think that's a big key reason people might go for this technology. But that just tells me that, hey, there are human reasons we're going to this, but we're still longing for a human connection that's positive for us and
mm.
genuine for us and healing for us. And if humans are going to do it, the AI will, in our perception, but like maybe we need to do a better job of teaching us as humans again to reconnect, coming off of things like COVID and the pandemic and all these other reasons people are struggling to connect. Let's do that. And
Yeah.
and if we do a better job of that, I think we can sort of reconnect and do some of that healing we're hoping AI is going to do for us.
Yeah, and it shows that people want to feel validated, they want to feel heard. Like the basic needs there. And then like how do we show up in our friendships or relationships with that level of validation and listening? Like how do we learn how to listen better? And then yeah, I think we did need a little relationship crash course or friendship crash course after COVID to be like, how do we do this again? Like how are we supposed to interact with each other? And like I've always been like, why don't we have like courses on healthy relationships in college? Like that are beyond just the like, oh, sexual assault prevention training, which is super important, but it's like, and then how are we supposed to be like, how do you sustain a healthy relationship? Not just how do you get into it? And I think that's what's really missing when we see, like, even with these manosphere influencers, like, it, very few are like, if any, have like models of healthy long term relationships where they're not like incredibly possessive over their partner.
Yeah, and let me say a couple of the connections to that, right? Is that especially with the Manosphere content, and you look at the documentary that just came out with Louis Theroux and some of these other spaces with it, something people need to really clock is that men are overwhelmingly saying that they struggle with relationships. They're feeling lonely, they're feeling isolated, feeling rejected, and all these other things. Then why the hell would you go to the people that have the least successful relationships possible to try to learn that from? And a really key element I want to point out that there was an issue. It was a couple months ago where some of these prominent manosphere influencers went on a trip together, kind of a little trip together in Miami to these nightclubs in Miami. So there was guys like Nick Fuentes was there, Sneeko was there, Clav or Clavicular, who were all the Looks Maxon guy, he was there. The Tate brothers are there, right? And a couple other guys from the documentary were there too. Myron was there, and all this other stuff, right? And if you watch them, the way that they interacted as a relationship guy, who does the work I do, and the masculinity guy, I clocked it right away, and I hope other people clock this moment too. They didn't know how to really interact with each other in a real genuine way. It was a lot about advice giving and trying to like neg women, and like they didn't really know how to connect with each other necessarily unless it was at the expense of other people. Hence a lot of them got in trouble because they started playing an anti-Semitic song by Kanye, loudly, and they ended up, a bunch of them got banned from nightclubs in Miami when these videos went viral of them hanging out together, vibing out to this song. Almost immediately when that happened, they started turning on each other. Where like the Tate brothers turned on Sneeko, people started like arguing over whose fault it was, who played the song, and it just goes to show like these communities are all about jockeying for power and position without any ounce of genuine ability to connect to each other. I
Yeah.
think you see some of the farther right people in whether it be the government or other spaces, like none of them know how to do relationships
No.
whatsoever. People are looking for healing and they're looking for information. And so a lot of these men who are feeling lonely and isolated do not go to these men who don't know how to do this without control. You know how like depthful your relationship has to be to actually maintain a long-term committed relationship with someone without those elements of like complete control. Like that's work. That's the real work. Working through friction and stuff. I've been with the same woman for over 10 years now. That's work. That's a choice to stay in it and try to be in it. And if I follow these guys who have no clue what they're doing, when it came to relationships, I would never be happy. And I'm extremely happy. And I have a lot of issues. Like, don't get me wrong, I have a lot of anger. I'm like, I shut down, I do. And
Mhm.
I'm someone who does this work and I still struggle with it. But it's like the awareness and the ability to apologize and take accountability.
Mhm.
All these things are being wiped away from men. And to me, that's what makes a man. A man is the ability to like do the depth, to take accountability, to say you're sorry, to check your ego and help create an environment where someone feels safe and comfortable with you. And I think those are all things that are lost when we start to follow this kind of stuff.
Yeah, and it's like reframing, like, what does it actually mean to protect? It means that the people in your life feel safe when they're around you. And
Yeah.
like, I gotta tell you, none of the people in that documentary look safe around the folks in that. And
Yeah.
like, and it's really interesting because I remember I was dating a guy and we in Miami, and we went long distance, and all of a sudden all of his guy friends, instead of being like, "Oh, like that's awesome that you guys are continuing," or whatever, they were like, "Well, she's gonna cheat on you," or
Yeah.
it was this kind of like sabotage amongst like the male friend group that was just like expecting the worst and putting like these planting these little ideas in my
Yeah.
ex's brain of like, this is gonna happen, this, because there wasn't as much of a culture of like, that's incredible that you guys are in a relationship, or like, that's like, how do you get there, or what do you do to sustain that?
I think what men particularly can do really well, if you have the tools to do it well, is get really depthful with your friends and be really helpful and supportive and strong for them. And reoriented like what it means to be a protector and provider for people. At a time, look, if my whole thought about what it meant to be a man meant to be like providing monetarily like a lot of these manosphere folks, like what am I supposed to do when there's like an economic downturn and like all that ability is taken away from me, right? Well, a lot of the manosphere stuff is like, well, you're not grinding hard enough, right? Like that's not on the world around you or the politics at play, or dare I say me exploiting you for your money. Like it's not on me or these other systems, it's on you because you're not good enough. What I might say instead is like, hey, like no, like there's a lot of outside forces outside of your control, and that's tough as a man to accept that that's not in your control. But what are other ways you can also provide too? Like, let's try to get you on your feet monetarily through policy and other things. I agree with that. But at the same time, like, what else can you provide? Well, maybe you can provide a sense of peace to your friends and
Mm,
family around you, right?
yep.
So the women in your lives can, if they actually choose you over the bear, like, you're doing something really well. Like, that's amazing. Like, I love
They
that.
choose you over the bear, you're
Right,
doing
like that you're
something really
doing
well.
well. Like, like actually help like heal gender dynamics and relationships. And that doesn't mean give up what it means to be a man. It just means sort of redefining like an understanding of it. Like you can provide so much. Like what would be like in my family, like like I said, I love my dad, but like sometimes his mood really dictated the mood of the family, right? Like if he was in a bad mood, it was bad for everybody,
Mm,
right? And if he was in a good mood, it was good for everybody. Well, what if you just like did the work around some of that, and it you just kind of like realize what your impact was on people and help control some of that and navigate it, increase your emotional intelligence and stuff like that, and my dad has gotten so much better with that over the years as a man, now in his 70s. It's never too late
mhm.
for that. But I
No.
feel like, redefining being a protector and a provider is really important, and doesn't have to be in this rigid box that the manosphere is selling you or that AI is telling you like you should always be.
Yeah.
Like it's so much more depthful than that, and I wish people can kind of see that. And it's so much easier to heal and do that kind of work than it is to like control women in your life, try to make a bunch of crypto money, or like manage OnlyFans models, the quick fixes that's going to leave you still feeling empty because where's that going to take you? You're never going to actually connect to people genuinely, and I think we
Yeah.
see that in the documentary.
Yeah, and this is the long-term success game. Like, it's not the short-term, like, dopamine hit of like, "Oh, look, you woke up and you have 1,000 more dollars in your bank account." Like,
Yeah.
God knows what you did. Um, who is this profiting? Like, the AI companionship and these manosphere content creators, like, who is raking in the cash from this?
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think like, we have to consider several things, right? I think like the AI, the tech bros profit quite a bit off of this. And I think what's interesting is at a time where a lot of like tech bros, CEO types, are kind of like telling you right to your face things like, hey, it takes a long time to teach a human how to do things. Like, why don't you just let AI do that, right? Like, you gotta teach and allow a human 20 years to learn a musical instrument. Like, no one wants to do that, right? Like, rejection, let's get rid of that. Having to negotiate in a relationship, let's get rid of that. Like, all of these things, like feeling lonely, like, no, like, we'll get rid of that too. That can sound really good in and of itself. But when you really sit with it, what they're really saying is like, we want to eliminate anything that makes you truly vulnerable as a human being, that makes you human, right? And I think a lot of people of a lot of power and control, in particular, a lot of the tech CEOs who are marketing, AI in this way, are people who are kind of giving you a glimpse into all the ways that they think men should really be, which is
Mhm.
like not vulnerable whatsoever, always powerful, always in control, right? They're
Yeah.
selling you something by selling you this tech and keeping you on it. And by the way, if you want to deepen your relationship with your AI companion, that's going to cost some more money to get particular kinds of messages, right?
Yeah.
Typical kind or more particular advice or more in-depth advice from some of these manosphere folks. Like it's going to cost you money for the access. And that is completely profiting off of things at a time when gambling sites are everywhere. Wherever I am as a man, I don't even gamble like that, right? I might put $20 down on like a fantasy football thing here and there, right? Like that's my vibe. But like,
Yeah.
why is it every website I go to have gambling, available, or like no matter what the algorithm is, I'm always going to get some OnlyFans model being filtered toward me. And I'm not knocking that hustle either, you know? But what I am saying is that look, follow the money and look at
Yeah.
where the advertising is going. I wonder what the economy would really look like if men, as men, were a little bit more healed, right? Like, how would that
Mm.
really influence the attention economy? I can't even imagine all the different ways it would impact the economy if we just were healed up a little bit differently and could put our attention to other things, and cope differently. It would be really wild to me.
And talk about provider status too. It's like this gambling in the long term is not going to make you money. Like realistically, the house always wins. And so thinking about like I, as a young woman, am not getting ads for gambling sites, like ever. Like, and so just think about that as like young men are getting preyed upon by these guys to gamble. And like, if you're thinking about like economic independence, whatever, like there's like that money that I'm putting in my savings right now is like accruing interest or that I'm investing right now is rather than gambling it away. And I've no young woman in my life that are gambling right now, but I do know a good amount of young men.
They understand the psychology. They understand the psychology of you and how to exploit you. The manosphere gets that, and I think the technology understands that. The bros understand that. People who are high up understand it, and they use it and they weaponize it against us. And I think what I really encourage people to do is like when you're really truly invested in the healing part of this, whether it be like, and I also say this, like I think masculinity is a process as opposed to something you are or are not. I think it is like an intentional, deeply spiritual process, honestly, with people.
Hmm.
Like to really like look and examine your ego and the ways that you show up that might contribute to your issues, but also the ways that systems might conspire against you. Like, it's all true, right? It all comes together. I think that takes a lot, but the more invested you are in doing that sort of work, whether it be therapy or not for people, you start to attract people to you that are also doing that kind of work and will validate that and do what you want to do, right? When I started doing this sort of more intentional work on myself was the time I started attracting a lot more relationships into my
Yeah.
life that were serving me much more healthfully. And I think people are sort of afraid to do that sort of work, but you're gonna have so much more depth to your life, and you'll be like honestly so much happier. Like I'm not a millionaire. I don't drive a Bugatti. Like I'm not out here on yachts and stuff.
What?
I want that life. So if Carolyn, you know anybody else with like yachts that you want your boy on there with him, like
Sadly, I don't.
more than happy to be a yacht friend for somebody. But me not having that, like I know that doesn't define me, but like yeah, I'm in a long-term committed relationship. I have a much deeper relationship with my own father because of the work
Hmm.
that I'm doing now, and my own mother, my own family. Like women in my family will come to me in ways that they don't go to other men in the family because I show up differently, and that's genuine, right? Like men's groups
Yeah.
I'm a part of, men reaching out to me for advice or just guidance or just like wanting to be in community with me, like that's so much more richer to me than anything that I could be someone who people feel that with.
Well, this has been so enlightening, but it's time to transition to the last question, which is, Saeed, what do you love about being a man?
I think what I love most about being a man is the ability to really like influence and protect others in your life and really look out for your community. I think like it's about the strength that I and confidence I really embody when I'm doing well and I'm like trying to tap in. It's like I really feel when what I love most about being a man is when I'm in my full humanity, my
Hmm.
full
Yeah.
humanness. That's really helps me, things that aren't warped by shame or entitlement. Like when I'm just being led by just wanting to be genuinely connected to others, I just love the confidence I can have. I love that people will look to me for guidance or advice. I love that people care about my opinion on things, as a man, but I want to also earn that. Some of my most depthful relationships with people are men who are doing the work too with me. Like if you are able to do the work and then you have the opportunity to really help not just yourself heal, but other people heal too, you know?
Love that. I think as we all do our healing work and like supporting one another, I think it's gonna make our world a little bit less tough right now. Dr. Saed D. Hill, thank you so much for joining me on the Masking Tapes. Folks, make sure to subscribe, follow along at maskingtapes.pod. Thank you to our sponsor, Root for Good, and continue to stay connected and have these conversations. I am just so grateful to get to continue these conversations, and thank you so much for your wisdom and insights.